Today, we are diving into the absolutely incredible journey of North Carolina. It's a story that kicks off with one of America's oldest, spookiest mysteries and ends up at the cutting edge of global technology and finance.
And that's really the big question, isn't it? How on earth does a place, famous for a settlement that literally vanished, transform itself over 400 years into a powerhouse of research and innovation? Well, the answer is a fascinating story of deep divisions, revolution, and constant reinvention. I mean, just look at this timeline to get a sense of the scale we're talking about. We're covering a massive span of history, starting with hunter-gatherers 10,000 years ago all the way to today. It's a huge scope, so let's break it down. Here's how we're going to tackle it. We'll start with the earliest people and that legendary mystery. Then we'll get into how the colony was basically split in two from the very beginning, its huge role in the American Revolution, the absolute trauma of the Civil War, and then a dramatic pivot in the 20th century that created the modern state we know today. All right, let's jump right into this first chapter. And to do that, we have to go back thousands of years before any European ships ever appeared on the horizon. You know, the human story in North Carolina runs incredibly deep. We're talking long before any cities, any colonies, people were here. At a place called the Hardaway site, there's proof of hunter-gatherers living in a totally different Ice Age landscape, nearly 10,000 years ago. Just let that sink in.
And by the time Europeans showed up, this land was anything but empty. It was home to this rich tapestry of distinct cultures. Along the coast, you had Algonquian-speaking peoples. If you moved inland, you'd find powerful Iroquoian-speaking nations like the Cherokee. And in the Piedmont, Siouan-speaking tribes. It was a complex and populated world.
And into this world sailed the English. The mission, backed by Sir Walter Raleigh, was simple: set up the first permanent English foothold in North America. But this wasn't going to be some story of triumph. It turned into one of our most famous and baffling mysteries. So imagine this. The colony's governor, John Wright, sails back to England for supplies. He gets delayed for 3 years because of a war. When he finally gets back in 1590, the settlement is gone, just abandoned. No sign of a fight, no bodies, nothing. Just this one single cryptic word carved into a post. The fate of those 117 people is still a mystery today. So that mystery kind of hangs over everything, right? But it didn't stop a new wave of settlement, which led to an official colony, one that, from its very start, was deeply divided against itself. Decades after Roanoke, permanent settlement finally stuck. In 1663, the king created the massive province of Carolina. But here's the thing, the place was huge, and the northern and southern parts were becoming two totally different worlds. They were so distinct that by 1712, they just made it official and split the colony in two. By 1729, North Carolina was its own official royal colony. And this right here, this shows you that split perfectly. In the east, along the coast, you had this wealthy class building a plantation economy on the backs of enslaved people with really close ties to Britain. But out west, it was a completely different story. You had fiercely independent small farmers, many of them immigrants, and this clash, this fundamental division, is going to define North Carolina politics for centuries. And you know that fiercely independent spirit we just talked about? Well, that is what's going to push North Carolina right to the front lines of the American Revolution. Okay, get this. It's April 1776. That's months before the Declaration of Independence is even written. And North Carolina's leaders pass what are called the Halifax Resolves. It was the very first formal, official call for independence by any of the 13 colonies. Before anyone else, they were the ones who stood up and said, "We're done." Now, after the war, you'd think they'd jump right into the new USA, but not exactly. They were really skeptical of the new Constitution, and they actually rejected it at first. They were basically holding out for a Bill of Rights. Once they got assurances that would happen, they were in, becoming the 12th state. But that new nation had a deep, terrible flaw. Remember that Eastern economy built on slavery? Well, that issue was about to explode and tear the country and North Carolina apart. These numbers from 1860 are just staggering. 1 out of every 3 people in the state was enslaved. Over 330,000 human beings. And because of that economic and social reality, even though many people in the state were reluctant to secede, once the war began, North Carolina joined the Confederacy. And the state's contribution to the war was huge, but the cost was absolutely devastating. More than 30,000 North Carolina soldiers would die in the Civil War. It's a number that's just hard to wrap your head around. And here's a really brutal fact of that war. For most of those soldiers, the biggest enemy wasn't a bullet. It was disease, filth, and just plain starvation. The brutal conditions of the war itself were the biggest killer by far. The war's end did not bring peace. There was this brief, hopeful period of reconstruction, but it was met with incredible violence. And you have to understand, what happened in Wilmington in 1898, it's the only time in American history that a democratically elected government was overthrown in a violent coup. It was followed by a new constitution designed specifically to strip African Americans of their right to vote. So as we turn the page into the 20th century, North Carolina is really at a low point, economically shattered and socially broken. But it's right here, from these ashes, that something entirely new is about to be born, driven by world-changing innovation and a powerful new fight for civil rights. And then, in 1903, this happens. On a windy beach at Kitty Hawk, two brothers from Ohio do the impossible. For 12 whole seconds, they flew. And in those 12 seconds, the entire world changed. And that's where North Carolina gets that famous motto, first in flight. Now fast forward about 50 years, and you have another moment that changes everything, but in a totally different way. It starts with just 4 Black college students. They walk into a Woolworth's, sit down at the whites-only lunch counter, and politely ask to be served. And that one simple, unbelievably brave act, it lit a fire, sparking the sit-in movement that spread like wildfire across the entire South. So you see these two incredible threads, right? You've got world-changing technology on one hand, and this powerful fight for social justice on the other. And what's amazing is how they start to weave together to create this modern North Carolina. This chart just says it all, doesn't it? Back in 1900, the economy was all about tobacco, textiles, and furniture, stuff you could make with your hands. But today, it's a whole different ballgame. Now it's driven by tech, pharmaceuticals, and big-time banking. And here's the key. This transformation didn't happen by accident. It was a strategy. Back in 1959, state leaders had this brilliant idea. What if we take our 3 big universities, Duke, UNC, and NC State, and build a giant research park right in the middle to connect their brainpower with businesses? That idea became Research Triangle Park. You combine that engine of innovation with Charlotte becoming the second biggest banking center in the country, and boom, that's how you build the new North State. So, we come right back to where we started. The story of North Carolina is this unbelievable story of reinvention. From a mysterious lost colony to a global leader in tech and finance, it has remade itself over and over again. And it just makes you wonder, what's the next chapter going to look like? Hey, if you liked digging into North Carolina's incredible history, we've got a whole playlist of these U.S. state histories that you should definitely check out. And of course, if you want more explainers just like this one, make sure you subscribe to Notebook Summaries. Thanks for watching.